We met a gazillion years ago. Doug Leone at Sequoia had introduced you to me, as I recall, and when you were on the West Coast. And then it's funny, the next thing I know, I'm sort of tracking you, just paying attention to what you're doing, and then we were on a deal together where you were like the D investor, and I didn't know that you were in the stack, the cap table. And you're like, you rang me up and you're like, hey, it's me, I'm the D investor. So we did this deal together and sort of reaffirmed and reestablished a relationship. But actually, as I told you when we were in Columbus together, what sort of was amazing to me was what you've built. And it embodies what we built, because we did not exist 20 years ago. And then I look at what you've done as an entrepreneur on the fund side, but an entrepreneur nonetheless. And it's amazing to me, going from, I say 100 million, you said 200 million actually, well, it's 100 between friends, to 2 billion, assets under management and beyond. And I sort of want to just kind of, riff with you a little, just to sort of get a sense of sort of the risks and challenges that you've faced. So let me pull back and say, so Chris Olsen, Drive Capital.
I'm at Drive, the founder of the firm. I started it in 2012, so just over 11 years ago now. And as you mentioned, we've grown from what was initially a $250 million fund to today just over $2 billion, and our most recent fund at over $1 billion.
Yeah.
And we've done pretty well. Even this year, my partner and Marcos were just talking about this in the car ride over. We actually, 2 years ago, we had our first year where we distributed back more money to our investors than we called for investments, in spite of growing our fund sizes. Mm-hmm. So, we found a good deal of success in what we've done, but we think we're just getting started, and we think we're at what is the beginning of now what was previously something that was incredibly unpopular 10 years ago. And we have this amazing benefit of having built a venture franchise over the last 11 years that's really purpose-built for a corner of the world that's just underserved by founders. And initially, we described that area, it was just 3 cities. It was Columbus, Pittsburgh, and Chicago, and then we expanded to what was classically defined as the Midwest. And then we started investing pretty much everywhere, and people were like, well, what geography do you invest in? And I was like, well, it's kind of, they're like, it's kind of the Midwest, and I was like, yeah, it's kind of not. I was like, let's give it our own name, and so we started calling it the Driveway. And the result of that has been this explosion of entrepreneurs around America and in southern Canada that we've been able to work with and service, and had the great opportunity to work with them to build their firms, build their companies. And so we've had our trials and tribulations along the way, but here we are today, setting ourselves up for the next 10 years and trying to figure out how do we solve this thing as we do it.
So a lot of folks here are from the Driveway, although a lot from the coast as well. That's our footprint, as you know.
Every industry, whether it was healthcare, financial services, logistics, like you name it, we're going through this world of technology enabling things. And most of the economy was here, but there were no venture capitalists. And so suddenly I decided this was the thing I had to do. And so, eventually got up the courage, moved to Ohio, and here we are 11 years later.
Wow. A great story, actually. So I got to ask you the related question, of course, is how did you get your first 250 million in? Great story, sure. Great vision. Someone's got to bet on you.
And so, you start, really putting these, concentric circles around what people are willing to invest in. And as a first-time firm, it's like you shrink the universe of LPs down to maybe 1 in 100, if you're being intellectually honest. And then you take that 1 out of 100, and then you shrink it down even more with a first-time strategy, and you start to get into 1 in 1,000 kind of thing. And once we discovered this, it was, we were kind of mid-fundraise. Then we started to feel like, we need to treat this like a sales effort, and we need to work the phones. We kept calling, and so we got, 1 LP, and then we got eventually 21 LPs in our first fund. And we're very fortunate that they were willing to take a risk on us. And thrilled that we've been able to generate the kinds of returns for them that I think they deserved by investing in those first funds. So today they invest more, and it's created this wonderful momentum in the firm that's enabled us to grow.
So I recall early on you were keenly focused on robotics, and you always told me that, well, that's because some of the ideas may be generated on the coast. 60% of robotics are deployed within this center of the country.
Yep.
Right.
You don't want to invest in the best company in Ohio or the best company in America. You have to invest in the best company in the world. And the only way to do that is to source globally and thematically, because you can't call every company in the world. So what will happen is we have ideas around whatever a catalyst is. Robotics as an example, the cost curves had crossed where a fully installed bipedal robot or an arm was now cost competitive with a $15 per hour employee. And so that was the catalyst for robotic adoption in the workplace. And if you start looking around at other robotics companies, and this happens again and again, is that they're all flying to the driveway because that's where all the customers are. Like this is 12 trillion of the US GDP is in the driveway. So if you're not selling there, then you're not relevant. And so companies will start selling to companies in our geography, and that gives us an advantage because we have a Rolodex with all of those customers that we can introduce them to. And so whether it's robotics or it's financial services or it's now artificial intelligence or all these different things, what we find is that eventually you're not selling a technology, you're selling a solution to an existing business, and that exists. If you can make them more successful, then you'll be able to make a big company. And it comes on the shoulders of these next generation of technology innovations, and that's really where we come in. Is we can be that bridge between a technology and invention and what a customer actually wants to buy.
So it's sort of interesting, you talked about some of the challenges you faced, and actually with some humor and some seriousness just now. But also, I understand the thesis implicitly, and I think it makes great sense, if I could say that. But you still have to deal with the ecosystem, right, that you're presented with. And the ecosystem at the time, certainly in the Midwest, was not the ecosystem of the coasts, in particular Silicon Valley. And I'm talking about the richness of, you mentioned this earlier, of the talent, the number of repeat entrepreneurs in market. And we see this as a firm, as we look at our various markets globally and in the US, where the number of repeat entrepreneurs is, you can count on your hand. The number of engineers in a particular market may be severely limited. How did you sort of deal with that sort of mismatch between money and great ideas on your side on one level, but then on the other side, perhaps a constraint on talent? Or maybe my thesis is wrong. Maybe there was not a limitation on talent.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk for an hour on this. I was always dismissive of the word ecosystem. Like, I always hated that word because it's such like a nebulous thing, and I was like, can you touch it? Like, what's the ecosystem? And then, and my attitude was like, the great founders, like, they just figure it out. But what we came to realize was, once we invested in these companies, the same thing that always happens, which is like you start to discover like there's not one silver bullet. It's not like if you get one thing right, then the whole company just goes. It's really the accumulation of really banal things that end up being a successful company. And some of those things were in fact tied to an ecosystem, which I've come around on the word, because that is tailored to the way that they operate. And you started to realize that, look, every company needs contracts. They need office space. They need accountants. They need to follow the numbers. They need talent. And what we discovered very quickly was that in the driveway, the vendors around our companies were purpose built for their primary customers, which were big businesses. And they would show up with big contracts and long terms, and landlords would say, I need to see 10 years of trailing financials. And they're like, I don't even have 10 months. So we had to basically go in and build a lot of that up from scratch. And some of it is, I think has been a lesson around like finding better ways to access coastal firms or global firms, like folks like yourself. That is the pipeline of innovation that's coming. And that's really unlocked a lot of things that have been there. So it's really been a combination of building our ecosystem with global as well as local folks.
That's swagger. Love it. Thanks for coming out.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.